Hey, it's Drybear. I was recently fortunate enough to get an extended sneak peek at the upcoming Star Wars Outlaws out in August, so thank you Ubisoft for that. And we're hot off the heels of the Ubisoft Forward conference, the presentation that we saw, so I wanted to combine everything together to give you my thoughts on Star Wars Outlaws. The game overall looks great. I think they did a good job of bringing together the visual aesthetic of Star Wars and bringing that to life in the gameplay that we see in Outlaws, which, at least from recent years, is actually kind of challenging given the simplistic nature of the art style or art direction of Star Wars in general. Sometimes it can leave you feeling rather plain or a little bit undeveloped just because of the way that Star Wars looks. But I think they've done a great job with the lighting, the specularity on some of the surfaces, and the texturing of the characters and how everything comes together. There are some procedural animations which look kind of funky, but I wouldn't say that any of them are to the point where it would make you not want to play the game. It's just something you'll notice as you go through the gameplay. Additionally, it does seem like we're going to get a lot more stealth gameplay, meaningfully different gameplay than a lot of the action games we've been seeing recently. There's also some unique new mechanics that go into hacking into systems, opening locks, sneaking behind enemies, and trying to use the environment to your advantage. There's not anything absolutely novel here, but there's some new mix-ups and some new changes that I think are truly Star Wars in the way they're presented and feel pretty good once you actually get the hang of them. Overall, Outlaws has been giving me a Star Wars Fallen Order kind of vibe, which means I think it's going to be a good ride. I don't see enough to say that it's going to be like worth replaying or strong replay value, but overall I think it actually is going to be one of the better Star Wars games we've seen in recent years, and I personally loved Fallen Order. Now, Jedi Survivor, the sequel to that game, was not to the same level, and I didn't enjoy it as much, but I do think that there's going to be a lot of really good opportunity for a strong first playthrough of this game where you can just experience the world and all the different missions and the different types of experiences you can have as you challenge all the enemies and encounters that run your way. Yes, there is space flight, and in general it looks pretty decent. In the experience overall, it's snappy. It doesn't feel overly slow like sometimes you'll feel, and it's not like it'll be like an EVE Online where it's a very pacing, slow kind of experience. It does feel pretty snappy, and honestly, not many games, in my opinion, get space flight right. There's only a couple, and they focus on it as a primary focus of their game rather than a secondary thing. But overall, I think it does space flight really well. I actually wish that games like Starfield would even be up to this level. It's faster than you'd expect. There's some lock-on mechanics, and all of the different weapons and missile systems function differently, which means that you can always specialize your gameplay and function based on the ship you're using and the encounter that you're in. There's a wanted status even out in space, and you'll have to deal with that as more and more of the officials will come and try and shut you down depending on where you are in the galaxy. And there's a little bit some free roaming as well. You can actually travel around and experience the space around you. It's not quite as large as some of these huge games, but it does give you a little more exploration than you would get on the ground, allowing you to fly through different things. And one of the biggest benefits for this is that it's not like the Starfield cutscene. You actually do get to see some nice transitions going from out of planet through the atmosphere and landing down on the planet. Now, technically, this is still a loading screen. You're not going to be able to control the flight on the way down. It is a fixed animation, a fixed transition. So you go from outer space through the atmosphere and land on the planet through one fixed flight. But it is rather seamless. You don't get stuck floating in one place like you do in Destiny, and you don't get stuck with a loading screen like you do in Starfield. It feels very natural and very fluid, and I think on most of the modern machines, especially consoles, it's going to feel really good, which is a big part of making space flight and interdimensional travel, interspace travel feel alive and feel fun. The cities don't blow me away, but they do differ from area to area depending on the culture that you're walking through. There's enough there to make you feel like the space is alive, and I think there's plenty of RPG games and city-based games that do this really well, that show off the livelihood of the city and bustling and hustling and everyone running around and talking to each other. So I think this does a decent job of it. You can definitely tell that you're kind of walking through and you are for sure the protagonist. You're not someone who falls into the background, but it's alive enough that makes you feel good. There's also some impromptu events like phone calls, random quests, things that can pop up as you're going through the city, which again makes it feel like you're just out on a job and you're a contractor and you're getting hired as you go through the world. There's also a good mix of story missions, so main story campaign missions, side missions, space missions, exploration missions, combat missions, and a good bit of puzzles that go along the way as well. So I think you're going to get a pretty varied experience. Again, I think Fallen Order is probably the closest to this experience that you'll get, and especially if this game comes out and it performs well and looks good on most machines, I think it's going to be a great vibe. There's plenty of situations here. There's no puzzles that popped up that really gave me a thinker, but sometimes you have to think, pause and wonder, how am I going to solve this, or where do I go? And on top of that, the characters that move in and out of the campaign story missions feel like they have decent pacing. They kind of appear. Some of them are a little bit, kind of NPC-like, where it feels like they just came out of nowhere and they're doing the cliche thing with the movie and, oh boy, someone's going to get betrayed and yada yada. But in general, I think it's good enough if you're a lover of RPG games or you're a lover of Star Wars games, you're going to have a good time along the way. On top of that, there's a good mixture of lighting differences. You can see this on screen here, where sometimes you go from outside to inside and back to outside. The game overall does feel like it's rather on rails, and most of the missions will have, a pretty obvious linear path to them with some side exploration, collection aspects on top of that. But I don't think that you would expect this to be a pure open world, 100% exploration game with a massive map where you can get lost in. This is a story game that has these kind of extra elements mixed in. You'll do the classic puzzle solving and climbing, and a lot of the mechanics will be reused. And I think that the mixture of stealth combat makes this game feel a lot better, because if this was pure combat, I feel like it would get old rather quickly, as you're just kind of using your blaster or using your little pet friend there in order to engage with enemies. But I think the opportunity for hacking, sneaking around and doing more of these, cyber style attacks, or getting people distracted and moving them away. That stealth gameplay means that you have multiple different ways to approach every different scenario, unless it nears like a major story tentpole moment where things get a little bit more fixed. You also get to use your little friend too to do some extended mechanics. It reminds me of the Kentucky Plaza mission in Cyberpunk 2077, the base game, where you get to use the drone to sneak around people and interact with things and move things around or get people's attention. This kind of motion and this kind of gameplay always feels really good. And of course, if you get spotted or something happens, you can very easily turn that into a combat situation, or even use the environment in some cases to your advantage. The cutscenes in general feel good and feel natural for Star Wars. There's even some conversations you have with leaders on other planets which end up being quite interesting and intriguing. They definitely have that kind of Star Wars storytelling, so I would expect that going in. And in general, they're not all this way. Some of them are a little more procedurally animated and they're not like perfect, but I think that the vibe is there and the feeling is there. And especially when there's some droids that get involved, it starts to get a little bit more dynamic and interesting in a way that only Star Wars does well. There are also some minor touches they put in, which I think are a good touch. Things like adding in like perfect reloads and quick time events and special skill checks throughout the gameplay experience that you can use to express yourself or have better experiences or outplay your enemies if this is your choice and you want to go guns blazing, or if you want to do the stealth route. There's plenty of mechanics there as well, and I think there's going to be enough variety for most people to play the way that they want to. Now, with the sneak peek, we didn't get to see too many of the different weapon types that you can use in the gameplay experience. The customization itself was also a little hidden, so I'm hoping that like skill point wise, skill tree wise, and actually building a character playstyle is super nice. We don't know a whole lot about that just yet, and hopefully in the coming month or two we'll be able to pick up more of that and understand how that works. We did get to see a couple abilities, like ways to hack the enemy, or even do like the high noon thing where you can actually mark a bunch of enemies and all shoot them at once and do things like that. And again, your combo with your little pet friend can actually have you do some combo attacks, like maybe you take an enemy, he takes an enemy, and you're able to knock them out before they make any noise, or you can even distract people by shooting something, knocking something over, splitting them up, and attacking them that way. So hopefully there's a good mix of special power-ups, special abilities, and an interesting dynamic talent tree or skill tree that we can use to make the character experience and the gameplay experience different. And there's another thing that I really hope to see in this game, which we haven't been able to confirm from the sneak peeks or any of the presentations so far, or even the hands-on demonstrations, and that is the idea of story-driven choice. This is something that I love in RPG games, CRPGs, and ARPGs as well, if possible, where you get to kind of choose your direction through the story. Now, this obviously creates a lot more work for developers and can either be a positive thing or a negative game for the game in general, but I haven't really seen too much of that. In general, I don't really expect it for my Star Wars games to be able to constantly influence where the story is going and have different outcomes like a CRPG would, or even like a BioWare RPG, something like that. But in general, I think that there's going to be enough intrigue here for you want to get involved. Now, that being said, it is a brand new title coming out, published by Ubisoft and released in 2024. So there's definitely a lot of concern around, will this actually function properly on release? Is there going to be good enough performance? And what platform should you play it on, which we won't know until we get closer to the release date in general. And there's also going to be a big question around MTX and how that affects the game itself. This used to be something where we didn't think about it for single player games, but in general, we do have to wonder how that's going to affect the gameplay experience and how that's going to bring itself involved. They haven't made any official things that I've seen that are like super locked in for that, and we'll have to kind of see how things get closer. August 30th is the release date for this title here, and I think overall, again, if you like Star Wars, you're probably going to have a good time with this. If you're someone who's on the fence, you might want to just wait and see, maybe wait for sale, see how it turns out and how it releases, and once it's stable and good to go, then pick it up, because overall it is, I think, going to be a good time. But of course, let me know what you think down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.